Thank you very much, Mark. It's interesting points there. I think something that's quite important is that anyone who manages a community, a digital community online, has probably got a responsibility to protect young and vulnerable people as well. So I think not just something the police do, but anyone who runs a Facebook page or a Facebook group has probably got to have their kind of eye on the ball and protect people in that way. So we've certainly had issues with Diabetes UK, which we can talk about later if you've got any questions about that. So I'm Joe, as Mark said. I'm the Digital Engagement Manager at Diabetes UK. I've been at Diabetes UK for about 8 years. I started with a 3-month contract when I first moved up to London, and then did various marketing jobs before getting a digital role about 3 years ago. So I've been there, quite a while. So I know the place inside out, which really helps in terms of being able to get our messages right on social media, know who we're talking to. So that's something I'll touch on later as well as experience. It's just a quick show of hands to kind of work out who I'm talking to. It's always good. You all obviously have experience of social media. Does anyone here run kind of Facebook pages or Twitter accounts for businesses or corporate accounts or charities? Or so everyone, most people. The people who've not raised their hands, any connection? What's your connection to social media? I'll pick on you because you're at the front. Sorry.
I use it a little bit for my own business.
Okay.
Publicising it. It's not a charity.
Okay. That's interesting. So that's good to know where you're all at. Thank you very much. So just a bit of background, who are Diabetes UK? We're the largest charity for people with diabetes in the country. We support everyone with type 1 diabetes or type 2 diabetes. Do you know the differences? Shall I touch on that quickly? Because it might, nodding for you want the differences? I will explain the differences because it might help later on when I kind of talk about some of the challenges we face. So there are 2 main types of diabetes. Type 1, you generally get diagnosed when you're under the age of 18. It's the most common. It's when your pancreas basically stops working completely and you need to inject insulin to basically stay alive. Then there's type 2 diabetes, which generally you get diagnosed probably around the age of 40 plus. That can be linked to more sedentary lifestyle or other reasons that we don't quite know. So they're kind of the main differences. It's generally the age when you're diagnosed is the kind of the factor there. Type 2, instead of being treated with insulin, you'd be treated maybe with diet and exercise to manage your weight, and maybe on tablets as well for that. So there are 3.7 million people in the UK, and about 700,000 of those are people who've got type 2 diabetes but don't actually even know they've got it. I think you can have type 2 diabetes for on average about 9 years before you get diagnosed. And that's because of the complications. You might go to the doctor with a bit of problem with your eyes, and then you can find out that that's caused by diabetes. We provide information and support for everyone living with diabetes and their friends and their families. We campaign for access to good healthcare for people with diabetes. We have a care line that people can phone up to get advice and information and support. So there's loads of things that we do for people, and that's just kind of the tip of the iceberg. In terms of social media, we've been quite early adopters. About, I think, end of 2007, we set up our Twitter account and Facebook page, slightly before my time in the digital role. But we've also, so Facebook and Twitter, about 46,000 followers, I think, or 46,000 likes on Facebook and 38,000 followers on Twitter. In terms of the rest of social media, we've got a blog site that we use. We've started playing around with Pinterest. Google Plus, which is an interesting one. Been using Instagram, been using Tumblr to kind of get as a photo blog, mostly linked to Instagram. Been playing with Vine recently, which has been quite exciting, which we can talk about a bit later. Obviously YouTube stuff as well, which is something that we're trying to grow at the moment. So there's a lot there, there's a lot to do. It's pretty much me doing it all. So in between me kind of moderating comments, planning campaigns, keeping the communities kind of generally going day in, day out, as well as trying to train the rest of the organisation about social media, how it works, best practice, and how it can be used to kind of best get their work out there to the people who need to see it. So I think the first thing that's really important certainly when we're using our social media and what we've learnt to enable us best to communicate with our audiences, and for anyone else here using it, even if it's for kind of your own personal business, to know who you're talking to, so who your audience are, who likes your Facebook page, who's following you on Twitter, who's watching your YouTube videos even. And this will let you talk to people about what's important to them. And how do you do it? So knowing who they are is basically the key thing to effective communication. It does sound quite obvious, but like in our case, your audience can be quite wide-ranging. We've got people who are, you can see from the Facebook Insights at the top there, so we've got 25 to 34 and 35 to 44 are kind of the main groups of people in there, if you can just about see it. But we've also got quite active people on our page who are in the younger age groups and even at the older. So the challenge is trying to tailor your message and what we're talking about to the right people at the right times, which can be quite difficult. And the best way to do that is to look at what people are saying and look at how people react to what you put on your Facebook page, for example. So we know that the most active people within our Facebook community are either people with type 1, so the slightly younger demographic, or their parents, in most cases their mothers, so which kind of explains why the 25 to 34 and 35 to 44 age group is the biggest. We get a lot of parents who use our Facebook page for support and advice. They don't really often actually want to hear from us and what we've got to say. They come to our page and they use our social media to get advice and support from other parents and other people who live with the condition. So it's, whilst we can kind of use it to push out our information and join in conversations and talk to people, that's, I think, in the eyes of our users, that's kind of secondary, and they want this peer support network, which is really important. But how do we get to that stage of building a peer support network? It takes a while. So we've had our Facebook page, as I said, since about 2007. It kind of grows. It's been growing steadily year on year. We had about 49% increase in likes last year. About 120% increase in Twitter followers last year, which was pretty good. It's not all about followers and likes. You can have 1 million people on your Facebook page, but if they're not talking to you, or they're not talking to each other, or they're not liking your content or sharing it with friends and family, pretty much no point in having them. So you're better off having a small core group of people around which you can talk to and you can generate conversations with them and push out your messages and your information to them. So how do you get to that stage? I was trying to find a quote about this, so I couldn't. I'm sure someone bigger and cleverer than me came up with a similar quote. But social media is a tool for two-way communication. It's not just a broadcast tool, as I said. It's really, really important to listen to what people are saying across the social networks, engage with them, talk back to them, ask them questions, listen to them, take on board their advice, use that to kind of plan the future work you do. If you know some people are talking about a particular subject, maybe start your next post on your Facebook page, for example, around that subject, pushing your information or your expertise on that particular area. One thing we've started to do at Diabetes UK is look at the Google search results of how people end up at our website. And that changes, not dramatically, but it does change slightly on a week-to-week basis. And we'll look at that information of what comes kind of top one week, and we'll use that to form the content of our social media the next week. So we're able to stay quite relevant and we know what people are searching about. So it might be there's a news story about a particular article that people are searching for that on our website, and we'll then, well, we'll know if it's a news story, but if there's something like less subtle, we'll be able to then kind of make sure that that's the focus of our content for the following week, so it's relevant and it's actually what people want to see from us. So kind of touching again on how do you know what people want to talk about? Facebook, when you have a Facebook page, they provide this pretty handy little tool called Insights to the page, and you get to see how many people your posts reach, how many engaged users you've got, who's talking about this, so basically who's sharing your content and getting other people involved with it. And by doing that, you can have a look at the types of things you put on your page. You can see what generates the most reach and what generates the most engagement. So for example, photographs on your Facebook page generate, I spoke with Facebook earlier in the week, and they said, I think it's something around 53% more engagement from photographs. I can't remember if that's the exact figure, but photos get a lot more interest from the users of your page on Facebook than just you putting a few sentences and a link to your website or something like that. So that's really interesting to see what sort of content actually makes people engage with your page a bit better. And there are various other tools that you can use on Twitter. For example, there's one called 20 Feet or Tweet Reach or Crowd Boost that we use, and that all gives you different information about how far your tweets reach and how many people see them, how many people talk about you and share them and retweet them, which again is really important for helping you kind of determine what you should be talking about, what really turns your audiences on and gets them talking to you and talking to each other about what you're trying to say. And what we found is people like to share stuff. They generally like to talk about themselves, unsurprisingly. When it can kind of go a bit wrong when you're trying to get people to talk about specific subjects, but they might decide to start talking about something completely different, and then all the comments and all the tweets and all the posts coming through on your threads are about something completely different, which can be a bit of a challenge. But what we find is it's really good thing is this is an example from Twitter. So a girl at the top tweeted us about wanting to go on an insulin pump. So instead of having to give yourself an insulin injection 4 or 5 times a day, you can be connected to a pump that kind of administers the insulin for you throughout the day as and when you need it. And she was a bit anxious about it and wanted to know if other people had the same angst or the same experiences that she was kind of going through at that point in time. So we were able to reply to her and give her some advice and direct her to a blog that we had. And then we retweeted her and loads of people started coming in with their answers and their advice and giving her that information. So we were able to give her our expert opinion to this girl when she needed it, and then a kind of crowdsourced opinion and real life experience from other people that was really valuable for her. And what we can do by saving that in a Storify, which if you haven't seen it is kind of a tool where you can bring in loads of social media content and create a story in Storify. And we're able to refer back to that Storify should anyone kind of come up with that same question in future. So if someone were to tweet this evening, got a problem with, thinking about getting an insulin pump, can you give me some advice? And I can say, well, here's our advice, this is what you can do and how you can get one and how you can go about asking for one. And here's what loads of other people have had to say in your similar situation. So being able to use other people's own experiences to kind of back up your own information and support is really helpful. And it works really well through Facebook as well. As I said, people who use our Facebook page generally want to talk to each other and not to us. So this person was asking about some stuff around for her daughter. And you can see there's about 10 people have chipped in with advice and information. So generally, we don't always have to chip in with giving people advice. I'll touch on that again in a second. But what is important when everyone's talking to each other is the moderation side of stuff, which can be quite difficult. I've lost many a weekend and many an evening, much to my wife's annoyance, living on Facebook and Twitter, which she doesn't quite get, bless her. But it can be quite frustrating. But what we've managed to do and what's really good for us is we've got quite a nice core following of people who use our Facebook page every day and who are involved on Twitter and supporting other people, especially young people, with managing their conditions. So we've actually got kind of like a bit of an advocacy group who will message me or tweet me on Facebook or send me a tweet if there's an issue on the page that needs moderation. So I can kind of forget about it a little bit and they'll alert me to any problems if I need to kind of log on and check things out. And we've got some nice groups, nice people who literally, I think, spend forever, day in, day out on our Facebook page replying to people's questions, which is fantastic for us. But what's really important is to try and recognise those people who play an active part within your community online. And we've done that in various ways. It's just a few bullet points as we're going through. Users want to hear other people's real life experiences, not necessarily what we've got to say or you as a page owner have got to say. Once an online community is established and you've got people using your Facebook page, you don't always need to reply. People will talk to each other. They'll answer the questions for you, so you don't always have to get involved and do that. We do step in on our Facebook page as Diabetes UK if there are any inaccuracies or people are kind of giving information that's not quite right. We've obviously got a responsibility to make sure people are looking after themselves and not acting on any advice without either consulting their healthcare team or finding a miracle cure that they Google or get emailed, which happens quite a lot. And taking part in conversation, whilst you can let people get on with it, it's always good to let them know you're there and that support is available with that area of expertise if you need it, if they need it, which does work really well. What we do find on our Facebook page is if we reply to a question too early or get involved in a conversation too early, that will kill the conversation dead completely. So we've got into the habit now of letting conversations go for an hour or two and looking if they get any replies. And if they don't get any replies, we'll step in. But if we leave the conversation to kind of grow organically, people get the answers, information they want, and then we can step in once the conversation is coming to an end, and then kind of give our official advice, which has worked really well, and has certainly seen levels of engagement on our Facebook page increase when we've kind of taken a step back a bit. So who replies, who does our social media? As I said, it's kind of me. I quite enjoy, I started at Diabetes UK, as I said, on a 3-month contract in the customer service team. So I've got a bit of a customer service background, which is really helpful in terms of talking to people and dealing with any issues that arise on Facebook or Twitter or anywhere online, which is it's very good. It kind of, you get to know what the right things to say to the people at the right time, which is always very good. But it doesn't really matter who does the replying for your business or your charity or whatever it is that you work for. I think as long as you've got someone within your business or organisation who uses Twitter personally, knows how to use it, and is kind of in line with the messages of your business or your charity, then they quite easily take over responsibility for sending out tweets or updating your Facebook page. So it's really important for people to know exactly how it works. What we've done at Diabetes UK is we have a care line. It's open 9 to 5, Monday to Friday, and they answer emails, they take phone calls, and I've trained them up on how to use Facebook. So now they log on each for half an hour a day between 2 of them, and they'll reply to some of the things on Facebook for me, which is really good. So it's really important for them to see how Facebook works and see how actually similarly aligned it is to the work they do as a care line in terms of answering people and providing emotional support and advice about diabetes. So being able to show them that that's what happens on Facebook and sit down with them and talk them through how it works, they're now all over it and they can't get enough of it, which is fantastic. So we're going to be able to build kind of the care line advice into giving the advice on Facebook, which frees up my time and kind of lets them kind of put their knowledge into practice in a different way as well, rather than just replying to emails or speaking to people on the phone, which is really good. Oh, that was me drowning in social media stuff. Just move that on. So yeah, the care line and the other digital media, the rest of the digital media team are always obviously quite keen on how all this sort of stuff works. So teamwork's really important, and talking to each other to make sure things are being replied to is always really good. If I'm off, things do tend to kind of slow down a bit in terms of what we go on, what gets tweeted or what gets put on Facebook. But we're kind of working around that at the moment, which is quite an issue when people have got their own jobs to do, to try and also get them to look on Facebook to make sure things are going all right within your communities there can be a bit of a challenge. So that's something we're addressing at the moment. We're hoping to get another member of staff to work with me to do social media stuff, which would be fantastic. But fingers crossed on that one. But internal communication is really, really, really important. People can ask you anything through social media. So we get questions not only about diabetes, but about how much of our money goes towards research, how much of your money goes towards admin costs. What do you think of this research story that I read in some dodgy article on some weird website from Uganda? We get all sorts of stuff. So what's really important is to be able to have contacts within teams across your organisation or business who are kind of experts in that area, and that they understand the importance of a quick reply and an accurate reply that you can post on social media. So we're lucky enough now to, bit of a challenge, we're lucky enough now to have a lot of people who have done social media work in previous roles, and they've now come into Diabetes UK, so they've got some experience of how all that works. Part of my job that I'm trying to find time to do is for training the rest of the organisation how social media works, so they can better use it to push their work out to people. And especially teams who kind of have face-to-face contact with people. So our events fundraisers, for example, who go out and organise the events and meet everyone taking part. We've got them using Twitter to actually talk to runners of the marathon and kind of provide that extra boost and that extra support, which has worked really well. And I've got a couple of examples of how we can use our engaged networks, so people who are liking us and following us, to actually kind of help us push our messages out kind of beyond this kind of core group of people who are already engaged with us. One of the difficulties we've got with the work that we do as Diabetes UK is, unless you've got diabetes yourself or you've got a close family connection to it or a friend with it, it's actually it's not something that people generally have that much of an interest in. So I don't know how similar that is for many other charities, but it has been a bit of an issue for us in the past. So raising awareness around the symptoms of type 1 diabetes, which is one example I've got, and raising awareness of the risk factors of type 2 diabetes, it's really difficult for us to get the general public, the general population interested in that subject. So what we've done to some effect, especially with type 1 diabetes, because that's kind of where our core engaged online audiences are, we've been able to use them to do the work for us and push the messages out. So we made a video called Type 1 Aware that featured parents and children that we recruited through social media. We filmed them and we got them to talk about their experiences of diagnosis and how they cope with living with the condition. We put it into a nice video and then we put it on Facebook and we put it on Twitter. My director thought it would be a really good idea for us to get 1 million views for our video. And when I eventually stopped laughing, I said, that's a bit ambitious. And we got, I think up to date, we've got about 78,000 views, which I think is pretty good. We did some kind of paid work behind it. We did seed the video initially. We paid for promoted Facebook posts and we did some promoted Twitter work as well. So not a huge amount of money put behind it, but it all helped in terms of us generating views for the video. But I think that only generates about half the views, so about 40-odd thousand views we got through paid content, or through pushing the video through paid videos. But the organic reach through the rest of through our own audiences and pushing it through these engaged people to get out to people who had no idea about what diabetes was, or type 1 diabetes was really successful. So the promoted tweet stuff was quite exciting. I don't know how many people have used promoted tweets, but I always found it quite interesting to hear about it before we tried it. So we paid an amount to get this done and the aim of it was just to get people to watch the video, which is all we wanted to do because we wanted people to watch the video and be aware of the symptoms of type 1 diabetes and know what to do if they saw that in their child. And got over 3,000 views, which I thought was quite good. 588 retweets. The replies was very low in terms of people just replying directly to the tweet, but that wasn't the aim, that's not what we were going for. We did work with an agency to get this up and running, and they've said they did a similar campaign with a considerable amount more spend behind it, and the results for this was very good, was much, much better, which is pretty pleasing for us. I don't know whether that's around the message that we did, the targeting that we did for the tweet. So we targeted parents, we targeted followers of celebrities who have kids. So Davina McCall was one. And so we're able to kind of look at segments of Twitter and work out who are going to have, where the best followers are going to be for our message. And that worked really well for us. And the paid Facebook post stuff was interesting as well that we did. So for those of you who don't know, when you've got a Facebook page now, you can pay to promote it, basically. So you can pay to push it into people's news feeds, which is a bit annoying, to be honest. Facebook say that about 16% of people who like your page should see your content in their news feeds. We don't see anywhere near that. We were going from around 16,000 people seeing each of the posts we put on Facebook, down to about 6,000 over the last few weeks. So we've seen, due to the way that Facebook push their content or the algorithms around how things appear in people's newsfeed, we've seen it drop massively. And I think that's because they now want you to pay to get more people to see your content. The more engaging your content is, the more likely it will appear in people's newsfeed. So photos again and videos and things like that are really important. But it's been quite frustrating for us to see kind of the reach and the impact that our content has dropped because of the way that Facebook has changed things. And that's been quite noticeable for us, which is a shame. But you can see from the bits at the bottom, so the paid reach, the viral reach, which comes from people sharing and liking your content, and then just the organic reach of the post, which is just people seeing it naturally on your page or in their newsfeed. So you get a lot of stats and information when you pay to push your content. And it does work to an extent, unless I found that if you pay too much, then you start to get a lot of spammy accounts following you and liking your content. So you might get thousands and thousands of people liking your content, but actually how many of them are people you really want to see your video and really want to engage in your messages. What I should have mentioned is I've scheduled some tweets to go out with links to various things throughout the talk, which is quite clever of me, I think. So there's a few things that have gone out. So there's a link, I've written a blog post about promoted posts and how they work and how they don't work. So I tweeted that out, and I've tweeted a link to the Type 1 Aware video and a few other things as well. So I'm sure you will find them if you follow the hashtag. And then what's also just quite interesting, I thought, is the YouTube analytics of where our views, kind of when the views happened over the period of time. You can see the little spikes of when we've done promoted Twitter or promoted Facebook work as well. So it's really interesting to be able to use these kind of in-depth analytics to kind of have a look and see visually the impact that your work is having, which is quite good. And then a similar example to the Type 1 Aware video is our campaign that launched in November, which is again around symptoms of type 1 diabetes, called the 4 Ts. We made a video, I made a video in-house using fridge magnet letters, a little animation. I've tweeted a link again to that. We didn't put any paid promotion behind that and got about 8,000 views, which I was quite pleased with, considering I made it behind my desk, which was quite nice. So quite a good thing about me running the social media stuff is I can kind of get quite hands-on with the content and the videos and that sort of thing, which is always really good. And that kind of comes to the end of much of what I've got to say about it. 3 things that I'd say to take away is know your audience, I think is really, really important. Use free tools to find out who your audience are if you're looking on Twitter. Use the insights on your Facebook page if you have one to look at who they are, and use the insights tool as well to look how well your each bit of your content is received. So what in a particular piece of content that you posted worked well? What was it that got people engaged, got people liking your content and got people sharing it? Join in the conversation. My wonderful quote, it's a two-way thing. You can step back if that's the right thing to do, but always engage. If people ask you questions, reply quickly. Reply with the right information. If you don't know the answer, tell them, I don't know the answer yet, I'll find out for you, and post again in an hour. So make sure as well that the rest of your organisation, your business, kind of understand the importance of social media and the effects, the potentially damaging effect it could have on your reputation as well. So that's really important to make sure we get things right. And don't be afraid to try new things is really important. So we've done that at Diabetes UK, basically starting from scratch, as I said, early adopters of social media, early adopters of Facebook and Twitter. And I think social media in terms of the charity sector is still in its infancy, really. There are people who do brilliant, brilliant things. The British Heart Foundation have done some really, really good work with their Vinnie Jones Hard and Fast campaign, which I'm sure many of you have seen. That was very impressive use of social media, and that combined all different types of media from across the organisation as well. So it wasn't just the digital team, it was the comms team and the marketing team all coming together to push the message out at the same time. But there are numerous charities who are just trying things and seeing if they work. And that's certainly what we've done at Diabetes UK. An example of that is the new app that's owned by Twitter called Vine. I don't know if any of you have seen that. So you can record 6 seconds of video and then share it on Twitter, which doesn't sound great, but I think it was released late last week, and on Friday I tweeted a video to one of our London Marathon runners saying just good luck, thanks for raising £90 so far, good luck, and then had my fundraising team clapping, celebrating what she was doing. And again, I've tweeted a link to that as well. But little creative things like that are really cheap and easy to do, just using tools that are out there, can be really, really valuable. And it doesn't necessarily matter if people aren't using them. So Vine was very new, no one really outside kind of the digital world, I imagine, really knew what it was or how it worked, but we were able to kind of use that to kind of get that really close personal one-to-one level of engagement with a supporter who then shared our message, and I like to think will be a bit more eager and keen, seeing that she's got that support from us to kind of maybe run a bit faster or raise another few £100. So either of them would be fantastic. And that's it, I think. We've got time for questions. Grace did email me saying I should bring a collection tin, but I didn't. But what I did is I've been blackmailed into doing a 10K run in May, and I hate running with an absolute passion. So you can text a number and Joe F60 and any amount you wanted to that 770 number if you wanted to, and you could donate to my wonderful Just Giving page. I'm doing it for Diabetes UK, I'm not doing it for some other charity. But that's happening in May, so I'm not really looking forward to it. So if anyone's got any tips for running, and does it get any easier and less painful, that'd be wonderful. And there you go, just in case you didn't see it, it's a little bit bigger. But that's it. I think that's left a bit of time for questions and stuff. So if anyone has any questions about either the way we use social media or anything I can do in general, answer in general, the charity sector.
I'll stand up so you
Do.
can. I'm Charles Coden. I'm a lobbyist, but today I'm here as chairman of a small charity called Speakability, which is about providing help to carers and patients who have had brain injury and then struggle to communicate afterwards. So communication is part of my brief. That's a great presentation. Thanks very much, Joe.
Thank you.
What I'd like to know is, how do you use the social media to engage with the government audience?
At the moment, not a massive amount, to be honest. There are lots of MPs on Twitter. We reply if they mention, if there's something happening in Parliament that we're organising. We've had a few events recently. We'll work out which MPs are going. We'll find them on Twitter. If they're there, we'll send them a message saying, looking forward to seeing you later at the event. And afterwards, we'll say, thanks very much for coming along as well. Beyond that, to be honest, we've not really done that much yet in terms of that. We've had, there are lots of petitions that people set up that we share in terms of kind of lobbying that way, but not a huge amount really.
I ask in the context that £1 in every 10 in the NHS is spent on diabetes.
Yeah.
So it's, you know, it's an important...
It's huge. It's £1 million an hour is spent on diabetes care and services within the NHS. It's a phenomenal amount of money. We're seeing our chief exec was brought in a year and a bit ago, and she's a baroness. She's very well to do. But she's very good, so she's got a lot of links within Parliament. So we have been doing a lot more engagement work with MPs and lobbying and things like that. But it's slowly getting off the ground now, and the change of government and the changes that are happening within the NHS imminently as well. That's something that we're quite concerned about in terms of how that's going to kind of affect the care that people with diabetes get. So we are slowly starting to see more and more of that. We are seeing more MPs attending diabetes events. There's an all-party parliamentary group for diabetes. And attendees of that have gone up over time. We had Anne Sobry, who's something to do with the Department of Health. But she turned up to one of our meetings and got really engaged, said something was bonkers the other day, which was quite a nice quote for her, which was really good for us. It was around the test strips that people use to test their blood glucose levels. So some people get them restricted, and if you've got type 1 diabetes, you need to test every day. If you drive, you've got to test before you drive to make sure the levels are okay. And those strips are being restricted. So she said it was bonkers that they're being restricted, and that was quite nice. So that we were able to tweet her about that and say thanks. And we do that kind of one-to-one engagement. There's nothing broader yet, but we have got a kind of a bit of a brand new public relations team, and one of the new guys who's starting that team is really keen on Twitter. He's used it well for parliamentary stuff in the past. So I can't quite claim to know how best to do everything. So he will use that knowledge from elsewhere within the charity to kind of help push our social media stuff as well, which would be really good. So I hope that helps in some way.
Yeah, thanks.
You mentioned that your supported care team work 9 to 5, Monday to Friday.
The care line, yeah.
With them picking up more and more social media engagement, is there any discussion of shifting that to the kind of times of day, the weekend when people are not?
Yeah, so the care line's been there we've had that for about eight or 9 years, I think, and it's always been 9 to 5, Monday to Friday. So you can phone up between that time, or your emails will get replied to within that time. We are, at the moment, we're planning for extending those hours. So that's something we're in discussions about at the moment. There's some quite interesting plans coming up, being announced in March that you'll probably all hear about, which is very exciting. And part of that is forming an extension of the care line, which would be really, really good. In terms of out of hours stuff and social media, if the care line are there out of hours, they would also step in and do the social media. Otherwise, it's me keeping an eye on what's going on. Maybe not always replying if there's something urgent. If I feel that someone is particularly vulnerable, then I will step in and reply. But there isn't at the moment actually, which is probably a bit of an issue. There's no one for me to contact if I don't know how to answer quite a serious question. I'm pretty much relying on other people to kind of step in and help and give advice as well, or the fact that I've built up a level of knowledge about diabetes for being at the organisation for so long, which is quite important. So yeah, that kind of answers your question.
I'd be interested to know your engagement metrics over viewing several channels, several aspects of social media. What are the ones that really, how do you do that over, in an overarching way, but also what are the ones that you really do like to pull down on?
The reach of posts on Facebook is something that we find quite important, so we can see how many people have seen the content. We use a link shortening service called Bitly, that you put your long web address into this website and it shortens it down so it's nice and compact. And what that also lets you do is lets you track how many people have clicked it. So that's really important. So if you put a nice post on Facebook and a link to your information, to more information on the website, you can see who actually has clicked it. So we use that. So that's important because we know people are going to the website and seeing the information. Through Twitter, it's similar with the shortened links, so we can see who's clicking it. And again, the reach of those tweets as well, we find really important. So we've just started using a tool called Sprout Social. I don't know where they get all these really weird names from. They've just got some random generator, I think, that sticks two words together. But we've just started using that, and what that does, we find that especially useful for Twitter, because I think traditionally there have been a lot of free tools that you can use on Twitter to kind of measure the reach and how far your tweets go and how many people see them and how many times they get retweeted, various other bits. But those free tools are a bit unreliable and they kind of come and go. And you'll find a really good one and then the next week it's gone and you're like, so we've actually paying, they do a charity discount, so we're paid about $20 a month, I think, to use this, and so that now works really well for us. But how we kind of bring all that together, it depends what we're talking about. We generally post information on both networks. Twitter and Facebook are the two main ones that we use, the ones that we concentrate most on. So for the 4Ts campaign, for example, that I showed earlier, I would combine all the stats together. So we'd look at the combined clicks on the links, the combined kind of number of views of the post and how far that's reached. The audiences we've got on Facebook and Twitter are very, very different. Daily Mail readers, Facebook, Guardian readers, Twitter probably is the simplest analogy, I think. But there's very, very little crossover. You might see the odd person kind of talk about Facebook on Twitter, but it doesn't really happen much the other way around. So it's not much of a problem kind of combining that to get like an ultimate reach figure, because I don't think there's very much duplication there. We did some audience research. It was in 2010 now, so ages ago, to kind of find out who our social media users were. About half were type 1, half were type 2. But we need to repeat that, and also within that we can ask what networks they use, so we can try and establish a bit better if they follow us on more than one channel, to kind of make the reach figures that we can report on a bit more accurate.
How does the audience you have relate to your potential audience in terms of numbers? You must know how many people are out there.
Yep, so there's 3 million people with diabetes, 300,000 with type 1 and the rest with type 2. So I mean that's the aim, I'd say. So there are potentially 3 million people. We've got 46,000 on Facebook. I don't know, extrapolating that percentage of people with diabetes in the population versus the Facebook way, I don't see make any sense. There's more. We've seen it grow massively, really. 50% of increase on Facebook likes in 2012. So it's growing and growing and growing. There was a point where I thought we kind of reached saturation with it, because everything slowed down very much, and the number of likes and engagement were kind of leveling off, whereas before they'd been rising quite steeply. But that was just like a glass ceiling, and that smashed through that, and it's keep going and going. And I don't know whether that's down to the fact that things we started doing, like talking about our social media networks in our printed publications, to kind of talk about them that way, which has worked really well. So you've got an audience who would traditionally get a magazine as a member. We're putting nice tweets and nice Facebook posts in that magazine to try and cross-promote our digital and non-digital offerings as well, which has probably worked well. So that's maybe something that's started the increase. I think we've had a lot more publicity in the press over the last few months. The whole press side of the stuff that we do has gotten a lot better. So I think awareness of the charity is probably up, which will again drive people to the social media if they're that way inclined. I think that's worked quite well. We rebranded in February last year. We used to have a nice pink hummingbird logo. It was very manly. but now we're this lovely blue. And I think, again, we spent money on that, and we did get some kind of negative comments from users who kind of predictably said that's a waste of money, you should be spending on some research and helping people. But actually, even without my Diabetes UK hat on, I think it was a great thing to do. When people used to ask me where I work, I would just say, oh, Diabetes UK, and they go, what, where? And I'd have to say, a diabetes charity. Now, if I say it now, they know instantly what it is. So I think that kind of awareness, brand awareness as a charity as a whole, has increased, which I think has helped increase social media stuff.
Do you have any tools in place to monitor references about yourself, your category, the sector you're in?
Yes, so we use a tool called TweetDeck to monitor Twitter activity. So we see every time we're mentioned, and we search for our name as a hashtag in case people use that, and we also search for the phrase Diabetes UK. So we're able to use that and pick up in conversations where people aren't directly talking at us, which helps. There are lots of paid for tools out there that I get phone calls trying to make me buy day in, day out. I'm like, oh, God, leave me alone. But I find Google Alerts, which is a free tool that Google have. You can basically put in a phrase or a word or your name or whatever else, and Google will email you every time that appears in a blog or a news story. And I use that, and it's brilliant because it's pretty. You can schedule it to kind of come in your inbox as often as you want, pretty much. And I get mine daily, so one of the first things I do in the morning is read through that. And I can see news stories where we're talked about. I can see blog posts where we're talked about, forum threads where we're talked about. So that enables me to kind of keep an overall eye on general feel of what people are saying, any issues that are rising, any kind of themes that are coming up as well. And I join in loads of Facebook groups and other pages and stuff about diabetes, so I can see what people are saying about us and infiltrate the enemy, so to speak, which works really well. And that can, if I see an issue, for example, on one forum, and if it's a big issue, then I can kind of counteract that on our own Facebook page and put a statement about it out, if that's the right thing to do. So yeah, you can pay a lot of money for people to monitor your own stuff, but I personally, unless you're huge and you've got millions of followers, I don't think it's worth it. And I can manage it with just one person looking after social media. There you go.
Does your tracker app form any part of your social media strategy?
Not really, to be honest. We promote it through the social media. So in April last year, we released an iPhone app that people can record their blood glucose levels on. So when they take their readings with their little blood glucose meter, they can pop the number into their iPhone app, as well as other bits of information about their condition as well, and even how they're feeling. And then it plots it all on a nice graph, and you can export it as an Excel spreadsheet, and you can take that to your doctor, so you can look at your history of how your blood glucose levels have been over a period of time, and use that to discuss with your healthcare professional your condition, how you're getting on, everything, which has proved really helpful. We had about 25,000 downloads, I think, so far, and about 22,000 updated the last version of the app. So we know that we like to think that people are using it, so they're pretty good figures. The first few versions of it had no kind of social sharing elements, but we have put in kind of a Facebook tweet option, I think, or definitely a Facebook one, so people can share their results to Facebook. Sounds a bit odd. It doesn't happen so much anymore, but there's a phase where people would just post numbers on our Facebook page, and that was their blood glucose readings. So they'd post like 7.6 or 18.5 or 2.1. So it would generally be the higher or the lower numbers, because if it's the higher the number, the higher your blood glucose levels are, which that's what ultimately leads to long-term complications of diabetes, like blindness, amputations, heart attacks, strokes. And the lower the number, you haven't got enough kind of sugar in your body, your blood sugar levels are too low, and you need to kind of drink some Lucozade or have sweets, jelly babies that work very well. So I think people want to share that information with people so they can hear what other people have to say. And managing diabetes can be really difficult, and you can do your best and you can work really, really hard at it, but you'll do a blood glucose reading and it's in the 20s, and you're like, oh, for God's sake. So people often will share that just because they want someone else to say, it happened to me the other week as well, but it's fine, you can pull through, it's all right, this helped me. And that whole kind of peer support thing is really important. So there's an element of that being brought into the app. Don't think anyone really, really shares it, to be honest. But we know that people are obviously using it for each other. And there's an Android version coming out in next week, I think. We did get a lot of grief for not making an Android version. My advice of buying an iPhone didn't go down. at all.
You talked about gathering together information on Storify,
Yeah.
which I thought was really interesting. As your library of information grows, how do you manage the accuracy of that information? Because it's really important that that information remains accurate.
Yeah, the stuff that we put on there, to be honest, is general best practice advice that is very unlikely to change. And I think the fact that a lot of it is people's own opinions, we can just kind of hide behind that, saying we didn't say it, they did. But we would obviously only put it on there if we knew that it was kind of the right thing to say. We've not had the Storify bits up there for too long, to be honest, so it's not really an issue that we've had to think about, but it is something that's in the back of my mind. As I think the example I showed of the girl who wanted an Instagram pub, I think that was from April last year, I think, so that's quite old, and we probably shouldn't share information that's that old, just because it doesn't look good for us, really. If you're especially online where everything happens so quickly and so instantly, it would be better to redo that, and we get quite that question all the time. So it would be a good idea for us to kind of update it, definitely, and kind of get rid of the old ones and push the new ones for a while as well. But it's good. We get quite a few people viewing the Storify stuff, but it's just a nice way to bring it all together. We've used it at the bottom of news stories on the website to show public comment, public opinion on stuff, which has worked quite well. Yeah.
You mentioned earlier how you're using sort of Tumblr and Instagram as well, sort of new social media platforms. How have you found like engagement rates across those?
Tumblr, nothing really. Yeah. I think we've got about 40 people following our, and we only really use it to link to kind of have somewhere online for our Instagram photos, and that was set up before Instagram had their web profiles. But in terms of Instagram itself, we've got about 1,000 followers, and that's not really from doing too much, to be honest. It's taken off hugely, obviously. If everyone knows what Instagram is, yeah, good. So it's taken off massively recently. So we've got about just under 200 photos, and I'll search for diabetes as a hashtag, and I'll go and like people's photos so they know we're on there, and I'll put that as a hashtag on all our photos so other people can find it. And that's kind of grown just on itself organically, really, which has been quite nice. It was a bit annoying that Twitter stopped showing Instagram photos in tweets, because it was a really good way of us being at events and kind of live tweeting and taking photos and sharing it through Instagram. But it doesn't really work so well now, which is a bit annoying. But what I have noticed is the demographic of our Instagram users is quite different to everyone else. There's loads of teenage girls, basically, which is really interesting because we don't get that many teenage girls, sort of 13 through to 16, really using or engaging on our other social networks. But for the first time, I noticed the other day, they put a girl, I think it's about 14, put a photo on Instagram and then said, Diabetes UK, can you please give me your email address about this, because I want to do fundraising. So I was like, fine, here's her email address. And that's just kind of happened on its own. I think just using it and being there, I think it's important to have a presence, as long as you've got kind of the time and inclination to look after it and monitor it, I think is quite important. I touched on Google Plus earlier. We have a Google Plus page that I only set up because so many people were using Google Plus when it launched, which probably isn't the right thing to do at all. But what I thought, with the massive number of people joining, I think it was probably quite important to have a presence there, and at least that presence directed people to elsewhere where we were a bit more active, where they could still get that support and advice. We have kind of started to use it a little bit more now. We're testing it out with our research team. So research is a big part of what Diabetes UK do, but it's not particularly sexy sometimes. And people on Facebook and Twitter are very much more kind of in line with that help and support information. They don't necessarily always want to know about research. So what we started to do is we've made Google Plus a bit more researchy. So our research team now post stuff on Google Plus, because they really want to do more stuff on social media and get people more interested in research, but it's not quite the right message at the moment for everywhere else. So I've let them run riot on Google Plus, and they seem to be doing all right. There's not huge levels of engagement or interaction there yet, but we've not really got a plan on how to use it properly. But there you go. Mark.
So you mentioned earlier that when on whether it be Twitter or Facebook, people will come to you as a site, as an organisation, but then engage individually.
Yeah.
And you as an organisation are merely providing that platform. Do you think that there is merit in, or you would achieve more engagement directly with the organisation if you were to personalise rather than just being an organisation? I don't know, Diabetic Joe at Diabetes UK, I don't know. But put that on Facebook, because when you look at the demographics, there's a lot of people there that are used to having perhaps
that kind of one-to-one. Oh yeah, no, sorry, I know what you mean.
Does that kind of sense that it's, you know, rather than
a lot of businesses and charities, they will kind of personalise what, in terms of when they reply to people, they often might put their name or their job title at the end of a Facebook message, or their initials at the end of a tweet, and they'll have their little Twitter picture in the side of the Twitter page so everyone knows who they're talking to, which is nice. But the view that I've taken is quite important to get the tone right, and it's also important for anyone to be able to reply to stuff and just kind of get the feeling that if someone's used to talking to one person, if someone else comes in, they might not want to talk to that person. So if we can kind of keep it as anonymous as possible, but still make sure the tone is right. The tone is really, really important when replying to people. We tend not to use the word diabetic. They're people with diabetes, not diabetics, but people with diabetes use the word diabetics. So we'll change our language basically according to how people talk to us, which has been really important and has worked really well. So I think that's enough, to be honest. It's been the same way for so long that I think it would be a bit odd if it was to change now, but I think it's important if I were to leave, for example, that kind of tone will stay consistent, or if Caroline do the posting on the Facebook, for example, that tone is still consistent, so there's one voice as the organisation, but it's a nice, friendly, happy, encouraging voice, I think, as works. But it's something that people ask, certainly within the organisation, quite a lot. I use my own Twitter account a lot to talk to people with diabetes, so a lot of our Twitter followers follow me on Twitter, and that's also, I think, really important because it makes them feel a little bit more involved in the organisation. They know the person behind the Twitter, behind the kind of the official tweets, and that again I think really helps engagement and really helps people get involved and feel kind of that they're being supported and someone is actually talking to them. So I found using my own personal account on Twitter, that's kind of counteracted the need for us to kind of say this tweet's from Joe, for example. So that's worked well for me.
You actually just hinted on something I was going to ask, but I was just wondering if you have like corporate guidelines or style guides or moderators for tone of voice and vocabulary, so that if you've got a consistent message across different medium and across time.
We have house guidelines, so house rules for all the kind of printed publications and the website content and that sort of thing, which I'm supposed to follow. The marketing team hate me. They don't, but I kind of don't follow that really strictly. When it comes to key messages about, so if we look at the 4Ts campaign, for example, about the toilet, thinner, thirsty, tired symptoms of type 1 diabetes, those messages are kind of, they're core messages, they're really important. But what's happened kind of within the last 6 months at Diabetes UK, where everyone is kind of starting to realise how much of an impact social media can have, is that I'm brought into these meetings when these messages are being planned. So at the very outset of campaigns now, I'm attending these meetings and I'm looking at it from a social media point of view and actually having some influence on the messages to make sure that they'll also resonate and they'll also work well within that social media environment, which has been really important because we had stuff before where people have done campaigns and they've gone on Facebook and they've been the wrong messages and people have got actually quite upset and it's had a negative effect on the work we were trying to do. But by thinking about social media first, at the outset when you're kind of starting to create these projects and these campaigns, it really helps. It helps get the messaging right, so then you don't necessarily have to worry about breaking house guidelines or not kind of saying the right things. If that answers your question. We've got time for one more, I'm being told. Yeah.
Do you compare notes with other charities in the UK?
Yes.
And success rates?
Yes, we do.
How easy does that work?
It works really well, I think. I follow a lot of other people who do sort of my job or digital related jobs on Twitter. People like to write about stuff they've done. so people will share. Some people don't always share results kind of into the level of detail that I've done with some of these posts, for example, but I think it's quite important to be able to do that so people can learn from it and take something out of it. There are quite a lot of events like this that are set up just for charity digital social media people. There's one called the NFP Tweet Up that's really brilliant. So there's probably about double the number of people who attend that than there are here. And we'll get talks from various charities talking about their kind of social media campaigns they've run recently. And everyone just has beer and talks about geeky things.
What about broadening it outside the UK? Is there any?
I mean, I certainly kind of keep an eye on what international charities are doing.
Are they doing a similar thing?
Yeah, I think I think there are a lot of people doing very similar things. There are some really good, notable examples who are kind of ones to follow and ones to watch, which I can mention a few later if you want, because I'll be around for a bit. But yeah, I mean, it's so easy to kind of see what people are doing and follow charities and see their messages and steal their genius to some extent, or at least kind of look at what they're doing and say, well, that could work really well for us if we changed that a little bit and did this a different way, then that kind of whole thing could work really well for us as well. But yeah, I mean, I think there's a lot of openness in terms of sharing within the third sector and staff who work digitally. Everyone seems to be quite keen to share their experiences and their best practice as well, which is really good. I think that's it.
Thank you so much.
I forgot to say at the beginning to thanks for being invited. It was really nice. Probably should have done that first. And thanks to Rebecca for being stuck with me in traffic for some time. It's the third time she's heard my presentation now because I had that long in the car. But no, it's really a privilege to come and speak to you all.